Hi everyone, welcome back to my second devlog for Distillery Tycoon, a cozy game about building your own whisky distillery in the heart of the Scottish Highlands. Over the last few weeks, my goal was to implement interactions like creating fields and planting crops. This meant diving knee-deep into systems work, part gameplay, part architecture, and a whole lot of trial and error. So let's take a look at what I've achieved so far. First, as a bit of a cleanup job from the last sprint, I refactored the ancient movement script. Previously it was tied directly to the player avatar, but since there will be roaming NPCs in the game, it made sense to generalize the movement logic and create an agent class that the player avatar now uses as well. So it's now a generic system that can control any agent, whether it's a player character, an NPC, or even animals later down the line. After that, I started with the first task of the interaction sprint, implementing the field system. The player should be able to create raw fields, cultivate them, plant crops and harvest them once they arrive. My first idea was to use a state machine, so I experimented with scriptable objects and went down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to build a generic state machine system that could power the field and maybe other systems later. But after a while I told myself, you ain't gonna need it. It just felt too abstract for what I actually needed at this point. So I threw that out and went with plain code for the first version of the field system. That said, I'm still using scriptable objects where they really shine. For example, for items, tools and the inventory system. Making the inventory a scriptable object might seem like an odd choice, but it actually allows me to easily create predefined inventories for other agents like NPCs as well. So after dropping the state machine idea, I implemented a field class that changes its appearance based on the current state. Right now this just means a simple color change and a placeholder model, including a basic barley plant I quickly whipped up in Blender. To allow the field to switch between states through interactions, I created an abstract interactable class. It defines methods for interaction, either directly like using a door, or with an item like harvesting a crop with a sickle. The idea is that direct interactions are instant, while interactions with a tool take time. That's why in first-person view, the player has to hold down the interaction button when using a tool. If the player releases it too early, the interaction is cancelled. This works differently in bird's eye view. Since that view is meant to be the management perspective, the player doesn't interact directly but instead requests jobs to be done by the player avatar. To handle the difference between these two modes, I implemented separate interaction handlers, one for the bird's eye view and one for the first person view. To allow the player to request jobs, I added a job system as a component of the agent class. It consists of a job executor class that implements the actual commands like moving to a target or interacting with something. A job type enum defining all the types of jobs an agent can do. The job request, which holds a single job. And the job manager, which queues jobs and executes them one by one using the executor. Right now the executor can only handle movement and interaction jobs, but that's enough to let the player avatar walk to a field and plant a crop, for example. Even though I'll probably extend this system later. Once the job system was working, I created a terrain wall class that also implements the interactable class. This allows the player to interact with the terrain directly to place new fields. At the moment that's all you can do with the terrain, but I've already defined a scriptable object class to define possible future interactions like placing walls, fences or other decorations. Last but not least, I had to implement the bird's eye interaction handler. Because it would be super annoying to click every single field when, say, harvesting an entire row, I added support for drag selecting multiple tiles. Here's how it works. The player selects a tool and drags a box over the terrain. The system filters all interactables in that box. It then checks if the selected tool can be used on them. If so, it enqueues a job for each of them. For example, if you drag across the terrain with a hoe equipped, you'll create fields. If you start dragging on an existing field, the system selects all similar fields that are in the same state and can be interacted with using the selected item. For each of these fields, a job is enqueued and the agent will work through them one by one. Even though I still need to tweak the system and squash some bugs, for example the snap to grid function doesn't work correctly yet, I feel like this is pretty close to how I want the bird's eye view to feel. You should primarily be a manager giving orders to your workers. And even if your player character does something themselves, it takes just as long as it would for a worker. No shortcuts. Hopefully that encourages players to really lean into the management gameplay as the game progresses. So yeah, lots of groundwork laid, quite literally. Over the next few weeks I'll focus on cleaning up the bugs, especially the grid system, and probably get started on a basic inventory UI so tool selection becomes more transparent. If you enjoyed this devlog or you're curious where Distillery Tycoon is going, feel free to subscribe or drop a comment if you're working on a project yourself. Would love to hear what you're building. Until next time, may your code compile and your whiskey age well. Slàinte.